Oh, welcome to B-Movie Enema. I'm your host, Jeff Arbuckle, your B-Movie proctologist. Now, I'm waiting for this week's movie to kind of make its way down the movie poop chute. Oh, I suppose if you're new around here, I sit at a desk right at the end of this orifice that movies kind of ooze out of. And I guess I'm kind of here to stand guard and kind of clean up whatever mess is made. But not all of these movies are bad. They're either forgotten or there's some sort of preconceived notion that having a title something like, I don't know, Werewolves on Wheels, for example, might indicate the movie's quality, but that's hardly true. Sometimes we get good movies, and sometimes we get movies that really aren't all that bad. See the aforementioned... Oh, it looks like this movie is making its way down here now. Ooh. All right, looks like we... All right, looks like we got it. Now I'm going to turn it over to my trusty companion here, Nurse Disembodied, to tell us a little bit more about what this week's movie is.
Angel Tompkins is the teacher. She plays Diane Marshall, a 28-year-old high school teacher. All the boys really like her, like stalker Ralph and another student, Sean. Sean is played by former Dennis the Menace actor Jay North. Sean and Diane ultimately start to flirt and develop a relationship that may or may not be as innocent as a student and his teacher should have.
Yeah, so this one's not so bad. This was written and directed by Howard Avedis, and it's most definitely squarely in the realm of exploitation. The early 70s featured a lot of movies kind of like this. Roger Corman did a lot of movies that featured pretty women in situations or roles that you wouldn't really expect to see them in, like nurses, or as cops, or maybe, or as we have here, as teachers of boys who are definitely old enough to be aware of how good looking their teacher might just be. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Avedis did a handful of suspense and thriller type movies. He definitely dabbled in sexploitation though. All you have to do is take a look at the posters to movies of his like this one, or The Specialist, or They're Playing with Fire, or The Stepmother, to see that he was well versed in making sure sex sold. Horror fans would probably know his 1983 slasher Mortuary best. That starred the double threat of Linda Day George and Christopher George. But all right, well, I can't really dawdle too much this week because this is a movie that's a few minutes longer than what we normally would show on the show. So let's just get right into the first act of 1974's The Teacher, and I'll see you here in a little bit. All right, well, how about that theme song? Holy cow, it's almost kind of lecherous, but not the way that you might think. Normally, you don't think of women taking a boy under their wing to learn about loving and the touchy-feely stuff. But, okay, let's talk a little bit about Ralph. He's our titular teacher's adoring stalker. He's played by a character actor named Anthony James, and he was mostly known for his pockmarked facial features and so forth, and he was kind of tall and had a really lanky physique, but was often seen as a pretty imposing type of character, kind of a heavy. He often played bad guys and had all sorts of TV roles and some minor movie roles as well. Now, interestingly, despite passing away in 2020, his final credit was way back in 1992 in Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. When he retired, he became a painter and even published books of his art. Of course, Angel Tompkins is the real star of The Teacher. Ralph, being the swell stalker that he is, follows her to where she typically takes her boat to and kind of spies on her. And real quick, what the hell was with that abandoned warehouse or factory or whatever it was with all that chest of creepy stuff that he had?
I don't know. I suppose he likes to be prepared.
Yeah, I suppose so. Okay, so Angel Tompkins was not a newcomer to movies when this came out. She had been in movies leading up to this in the early 70s as well as being mostly the attractive girl or the girlfriend or whatever. And taking a look at her in this, well, I can kind of see why, right? I guess you can say that she's a startled guy falling from a stairway outside an abandoned factory kind of hot, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, probably my favorite role of hers is as the lead Cleo in the movie Little Cigars. That was about a gang of dwarves that team up with a gangster's hot mistress to go on a crime spree or something. So as utterly terrible as the premise of that movie pretty much sounds, and as much as I am 1,000,000% sure it doesn't treat the dwarves with much dignity, the movie kind of sounds awesome. But the other movie of Tompkins that I actually know pretty well is The Bees from 1978. Now that came along during a time in which nature was kind of featured as a regular villain in B movies. But in this movie, the bees become, I guess, super smart or something. I can't remember exactly. But they threaten to kill off humans unless John Saxon can convince the UN to give the bees some sort of sovereignty. Trust me, that's what the movie is really about. Tompkins was a legitimate lead and worked until about the turn of the 21st century before retiring. Now, one more quick note before we get back into this movie. Marlene Schmidt, who plays Sean's mom, Alice, was Howard Avedis' wife and was in pretty much all of his movies, but she was a pageant girl from Germany in her youth. All right, so let's get back into the teacher and watch Angel Tompkins hose her legs down and offer to show something inside her house where she will definitely not rape him, as she says. But trust me, all of this will make sense here in just a few seconds, so I'll see you back here in a bit. Okay, so I think we need to maybe discuss the crux of this movie and try to approach this from as many different angles as we can. Now, first off, obviously everything going on between Sean and Diane in this movie is probably morally, ethically, and very likely legally wrong, even if Sean is 18. However, I guess if Sean was out of school, that's maybe a different story. But anyway, yes, absolutely what's going on between them probably should not be happening. However, that said, I'm just going to be honest with you. I can tell you from a guy's point of view, I would have killed to have had a teacher that approximated anything that Angel Tompkins brought to the table. I vaguely remember a student teacher coming and spending some time with my third grade class, and she was pretty enough for me to even then kind of have a crush on because, you know, she wasn't the typical old lady that we had. That student teacher wasn't half of Angel Tompkins, but if I was in high school and I come into my English class or whatever class and Angel Tompkins was there, holy shit, I would have probably instantly exploded, just spontaneously combust all over the goddamn room. And I want to get that out of the way right now. Sure, this movie is a typical male fantasy, but it's kind of interesting that this is something that turned out to be something we see in the news more often than we probably should, and certainly more than we would like to. That said, though, I have always been fascinated with those stories we've heard in the news about youngish female teacher going after a teenage boy. My interest in it isn't so much from the salacious side of things, but more from the psychology angle. So allow me to put away my B-movie proctology degree and let's pull out my psychology expertise, right? So I often wondered what it was that led to those teachers messing around with their students. You don't often hear about male teachers pursuing female students as much, though I'm sure that does happen. It might be a bigger story when girls go after boys. I don't know. But my point is I often wonder if there's some sort of maybe chemical imbalance that leads to them being more attracted to the attention that they might get from the boys, or if it is just, I don't know, like it is with guys, a predatory piece of their personality that makes them go for the boys. But I've often pondered that. Now, that said, in this movie, I don't think that there was any forethought. I think it's just the male fantasy of your hot teacher liking you no matter how goofball you are. And it might play a little to the exploitation idea of a sort of slutty nature to single or divorced women. The sort of original sin kind of idea that women can lead you down a dark path if you aren't strong with your own convictions, yada, yada, yada. Either way, I will always say that if I was 18 years old again and my teacher was Angel Tompkins, I would have exploded. I would be dead. My brains and guts and butt would be all over the room. Now, say Nurse Disembody, did you ever have a crush or anything on a teacher that you had?
Oh yes. My Spanish teacher Hector Sanchez. He was tall, dark, and weak Caliente. The dreams I would have about him.
Oh, okay. Oh my. Okay, let's get back to the teacher as things between Sean and Diane heat up while Sean still has to elude Ralph the crazy stalker man.
And in one dream we would walk on the beach and he would kiss my neck and lay me down onto the sand before doing the cutest little thing with his tongue.
Alright, so that was the teacher. Kind of a bummer ending, but again, I can't help but to think that it had something to do with the idea of a woman with somewhat loose morals or loose lady bits that leads to the way that the conclusion kind of plays out. But frankly, the unhinged Ralph is the whole reason why things go south. Yet, I do suspect that the other side of the argument that some would have would be that if Sean didn't get involved with this teacher in the first place, nothing like this would have happened anyway. But that leads to the overall bad takes people have whenever women are sexually independent and in charge in movies, and how exploitation movies tended to play to that. Now, Sean was played by Jay North, and as Nurse Disembody mentioned earlier, North was most famous as a child star playing Dennis the Menace on TV. And this was his first truly adult role after playing the child character a decade prior. He was in Dennis the Menace from about like the late 50s to the early 60s. But he wanted to kind of continue that as an adult, and it really didn't go very well for him, unfortunately. Some critics, you know, the ones that have our best interest and the best interest of the stars and filmmakers at heart at all times, felt that this movie was lurid and vulgar, and Jay North was so recently that impish menace, you know, so recently as in like 10 years, that this ultimately sullied him in everything that he had done. And that's utterly fucking ridiculous, in my opinion. For some reason, we tend to hold these child stars to a standard that doesn't really allow them to grow up. Jay North was 12 when he was Dennis the Menace, and he was still that kid to a lot of people when he was 22 and making The Teacher. This was a problem until more recently, when it seems like child stars were not really ever allowed to grow up a little bit more. But still, I do remember, even in my lifetime, child actresses being more or less slut-shamed as adults for appearing in magazines like, I don't know, like Maxim or FHM or Details, where they're wearing skimpy yet still proper clothing. And it turns out to be pretty atrocious, really. And that's where we need to kind of talk about Jay North as an actor and what became of him. This movie, and more to the point, the reaction to him being in this movie by dickwad, busybody reviewers, really pretty much ruined his career. But it may have actually begun to go that way before this. And as he grew up playing Dennis the Menace, he quickly outgrew some of the childish antics of the character. Plus, Joseph Kearns, who played Mr. Wilson, died unexpectedly before the end of the third season. And this had a profound effect on North, and it in some ways kind of led him down a darker path. So as he tried to mature, people were stuck on him being this little bratty child character. Now, a few critics did note that while the movie itself wasn't particularly great in terms of plot, the relationship between North and Tompkins is handled actually pretty realistically and with some care and tenderness. And I tend to agree with that sentiment. They are really pretty sweet together. As the teacher would ultimately push North well off the orbit of lucrative actors, he did try to continue his acting career by staying in acting classes, getting some stage work and so forth, but he was pretty much unhireable because of this movie. He ultimately joined the Navy and spent some time at sea. Later, he did sort of get back into acting a little bit, but he's mostly stayed out of it all, aside from doing some small jobs and some minor stage work. In the 80s, he was part of some strange happenings. First, there was a hoax that he had died unexpectedly, and around the same time, there were these people impersonating him to get access to Hollywood parties and whatnot. And later, after some child stars had either committed suicide or had gone down some pretty dark paths in life, North decided to see a therapist to make sure that he didn't have the same thing happen to him. He now helps counsel child actors dealing with pressures and other difficulties that he had to deal with. So, hopefully a happy ending after all. In an interview in 1999, North said, I am so happy that I was able to have such a positive impact on people's lives. I'm going to write my autobiography, and then I'm just going to live a contented, happy life here in Lake Butler, which is where he lived at the time, with the people that I love, and kind of just vanish into the mists of time. And I think that's where we should go here with this episode, and let this episode kind of vanish into the mist of time. Nurse Disembody, give the folks watching at home the details about where they can find B-Movie Enema stuff.
You can find all of Jeff's writings and upcoming episodes at www.bmovieenema.com. You can follow the page at Facebook and Twitter and check out episodes on YouTube. If you have a Roku, get OtherWorlds TV and check him out along with all the other hosts that appear there on weekends.
All right, thanks, Nurse. Hey, say, you think your Hector Sanchez there maybe has like a hot sister or something that might, I don't know, might be into some doofy dude like me, and maybe want to take me out to like a dinner place and have like old ladies talk about us while we get drunk on wine, and maybe like do like fun naughty stuff together with.